I never thought I'd be writing something like this. Even now, as I type these words, it feels like I'm living in someone else's nightmare. But this is real. Every painful detail. And yeah, I was with my wife, well, let's just say my sister. It's not something I'm proud of, but here we are. Let me clear something up first. I'm not some wild, unhinged guy. I have a pretty stable career, and most people would probably describe me as calm. I'm the type who doesn't get worked up easily, but jealousy? That's always been my weak spot, lurking beneath the surface, ready to take over whenever something didn't sit right. And man, if I'd trusted that gut feeling sooner, I wouldn't be stuck in this mess. So, let me tell you about her. My wife. The woman who could drive any man crazy. From the moment we met, it was like she had this magnetic pull. She was stunning. One of those faces you'd stop scrolling to admire on Instagram. But it wasn't just her looks. It was her confidence. This fiery energy that made me want to chase her even when I should have probably run the other way. She had a strong personality too, always needed to be in charge. At first, I thought it was exciting, even sexy. Who doesn't like a good challenge, right? But after years of dealing with her stubbornness, that charm wore off faster than I expected. We met at a friend's party. One of those nights where you don't expect much. And then bam, she walks in and steals the spotlight. I couldn't take my eyes off her. We hit it off right away, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. A few years down the road, we were married. That's when things started to change. It wasn't bad at first, but I began to notice small red flags, things I ignored. Her career had always been a bit shaky. She bounced from job to job, never quite finding her place. She worked in marketing, but it was a mid-level position at a company that didn't seem to care much about her. Then one day, she came home and quit. She said she was tired of working for people who didn't appreciate her. And you know what? I backed her up. I told her to take her time, find something that made her happy. Turns out that something was Instagram. She had an account, but it was mostly just casual, photos of her trips, a few outfits here and there. Nothing serious at the time, but when she quit her job, she threw herself into it. She started posting more often, following trends, sharing every little detail of our lives online. At first, I thought it was harmless. I figured, how bad could it be? It kept her busy while she searched for a new job, and we weren't struggling for money. I didn't expect it to blow up like it did. I thought she'd get bored of it and move on. But then her followers started to multiply. First, it was a few hundred, then thousands. Before long, she had tens of thousands of people following her every move. Every selfie, every outfit, every product she promoted. People started recognizing her when we went out, like she was some kind of celebrity. I should have seen the red flags then. But no, I was too naive. I actually encouraged her to go all in with it. I thought, why not? It's something she's good at. If it makes her happy, then that's all that matters, right? And if it didn't work out, we had enough savings to fall back on. What I didn't realize was that this shallow, fleeting online world was becoming more important to her than anything else, including me. At first, I was proud of her. She was building a name for herself, getting sponsorships, brands were sending her products, and she even started getting paid for posts. I didn't really understand it, but I was happy she found something that lit a fire in her. But the more time she spent glued to her phone, the more distant she became. Every conversation revolved around her followers, her posts, her brand. And don't get me started on the constant selfies. It felt like living with a wannabe Kardashian. We began to drift apart. Intimacy became rare. She'd brush me off, saying she was tired or had an early meeting for a collaboration. At first, I bought it, thinking it was just a phase and things would get back to normal. But they never did. Now looking back, I realize how blind I was. I was so focused on being supportive, so set on being the good husband, that I missed the signs right in front of me. She wasn't just growing her Instagram career. She was creating a life that didn't involve me. So yeah, that's where we are now. I'll get to the part about her sister in a bit. Trust me, it only gets messier from here. Up until a certain point, things weren't going all that well with her Instagram. It was just another one of those typical vanity projects, posts about our vacations, shopping trips, selfies with that look at me vibe. Sure, she had a decent following, but nothing that could really pay the bills, if you know what I mean. Then, out of nowhere, everything changed and fast. She started meeting new people, other influencers, bloggers, the kind of crowd who live for the camera. She'd go to networking events, which I later realized was just a fancy way of saying she was hanging out with other attention seekers. I didn't think much of it at first. She claimed they didn't affect her page or anything. Then it was all about learning the ins and outs of algorithms. Honestly, I wasn't sure how much of that was true, but the growth was undeniable. Her follower count skyrocketed, like someone had flipped a switch. I didn't question it. Maybe I should have, but I was just happy for her. Happy that she was doing something she was passionate about. In a way, I wanted her to succeed. I thought if she was happy, maybe we'd be better. But looking back, I was blind. I should have noticed the signs, especially since things between us were only getting worse. Now her family, that's a whole different story. Her parents are old school, conservative, and religious. Her parents were the kind of people who attended church every Sunday and looked down on anything they considered worldly. They didn't like the idea of their daughter plastering herself all over social media, putting her life out there for anyone to see. But my wife didn't care about their opinions. She never did, especially not theirs. Her sister, on the other hand, was completely different. Calm, reserved, much more like me. If my wife was a firecracker, her sister was the quiet, steady type, like a flickering candle. She wasn't into the flashy Instagram scene or the reckless lifestyle my wife seemed to be diving into. Honestly, I often found myself wondering how these two could even be sisters. They were polar opposites. The first real signs of something being off came when my wife started posting these swimsuit photos. Now, I understand the occasional beach picture. That's normal, right? But this wasn't that. She started going out of her way to book professional photo shoots, all done up, looking like she was trying out for the cover of some magazine. It wasn't just casual fun anymore. It felt planned, calculated, and it made me uncomfortable. But I didn't say anything. After all, it was her account, her body, right? At first, I convinced myself it was no big deal. But then, things started to take a strange turn. I began noticing some expensive items showing up around the house. And I'm not talking about small purchases. I'm talking about brand new furniture, designer clothes, bags, and other high-end stuff. Things I knew I hadn't given her money for. At first, I thought maybe she was using our savings or making some extra cash off her blog. So, I asked her about it. She just shrugged it off, saying it was all from her influencer gigs. Now, I'm no fool. I know how the influencer game works, and I also knew she wasn't getting enough brand deals to afford all that stuff. So where was it all coming from? I decided to do some digging. I combed through her Instagram, went through all her posts, checked for sponsored content or ads, anything that might explain the sudden flow of money. And you know what? I didn't find a single sponsored post, no partnerships, no ads, nothing. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. I had more questions than answers, and the worst part? I had no clue how to bring it up to her without her flipping out. No matter how much I tried to figure it out on my own, I couldn't make sense of it. I was stuck. Where is all this money coming from? What was really happening behind the scenes? I didn't know who to trust or how to confront her without making things worse. So, I did something I hadn't planned on. I hired a private investigator. I'd always thought detective work was a load of Hollywood nonsense. I pictured these guys working out of sketchy offices, tailing people in rundown cars, and charging cheap fees. Turns out it's not like that at all. It's expensive. Very expensive. But at that point, I didn't care. I needed answers. If it cost more than I expected, so be it. I had to know what was really going on with my wife, where the money was coming from, and if there was something shady behind her rise on Instagram. I'll admit, I felt uneasy about it, like I was crossing a line. But then again, if she wasn't hiding anything, what did I have to worry about, right? At least that's how I convinced myself. The detective didn't waste any time. He was all business. No questions, no small talk. He promised me he'd look into her activities, check for any meetings, transactions, or anything that didn't add up. While I was waiting for him to do his thing, I started thinking about another person I could turn to for help, her sister. Now, I hadn't talked to her about this before, but she was always calm and level-headed. Maybe she knew something or could at least point me in the right direction. So, one evening I decided to visit her. I didn't want to make it obvious, so I played it off like a casual visit. Just a brother-in-law stopping by for a friendly chat. When I got there, it was just her, quiet, the house calm. She looked surprised to see me. We sat down in her living room and shared a bottle of wine. She had this way of making everything feel like it would be okay, even when I knew it wasn't. We didn't dive into the heavy stuff right away. It started with small talk, but eventually I had to bring it up. I told her how worried I was about my wife, how she was acting strange, and how I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to keep my voice steady, but she could tell I was freaking out. I was terrified that my wife had gotten involved with the wrong crowd, that she was hiding something dangerous. Maybe I was just paranoid, but after everything that had been happening, I couldn't ignore it. Her sister listened quietly, her face serious but not shocked. When I asked if she knew anything at all, she shook her head. She said she hadn't noticed anything unusual and that my wife never talked about her personal issues. But then again, they weren't really close anymore. Not like they used to be when they were kids. Still, she promised me that if she ever picked up on anything, she'd let me know. It was a frustrating conversation. I left with no more answers than I had going in, but at least I felt like I had someone on my side. Her sister was the calm one, the steady, rational person you could count on when everything felt out of control. But even with her reassurance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something huge, something awful, was coming. When the detective finally called me back to meet, I had no idea what to expect. My stomach was in knots the whole drive there. I had this nagging sense that whatever he'd found wasn't going to be good. And when I walked in and saw his serious face, no pleasantries, straight to the point, I knew I wasn't wrong. He didn't waste time. He sat me down, pulled out a folder, and said, "Your wife's Instagram? That's just the surface." My heart sank, but I didn't interrupt. I needed to hear everything. "It's a front," he said, "a platform for her real source of income." When he said the name of the site, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I'm not going to name it here, but it's one of those infamous sites where women post photos and videos that leave little to the imagination. You know the type. Flashy, provocative, and making a fortune if you're in the right circles. I just sat there, stunned, trying to process what the detective was saying. My wife was involved with that site. The woman who told me she was working hard to grow her Instagram, building a legitimate influencer career, was actually earning money from something like this. The detective didn't stop there. He pulled out everything, screenshots from her profile on this site, proof of payments linked directly to her bank account, even her photo shoot schedules. Everything was laid out in front of me. And these weren't your average Instagram photos. No, these were professionally done, sensual shots, far more revealing than anything she'd posted publicly. This wasn't about fashion or lifestyle posts. It was about selling herself, something I never imagined her doing, let alone doing it in secret. I flipped through the document slowly, my heart pounding with each page. The detective just sat back, watching me process it all. He didn't say a word. The more I looked, the harder it hit me. She had been living this double life, this secret career, all while I had no idea. Sure, she told me about photo shoots, about working hard on content, but I thought it was all for Instagram, just part of the influencer hustle. But no, this wasn't about gaining followers or securing brand deals. This was about profiting from men paying for exclusive, provocative content. I remember staring at the transaction history, thousands of dollars all flowing into her account, and it hit me. That explained all the expensive furniture, the designer bags, the clothes, the luxury items I'd noticed piling up at home. It wasn't from Instagram sponsorships. It was from this. I didn't know how to feel. Anger? Betrayal? Confusion? They all hit me at once. Some guys might have shrugged it off, seen it as no big deal. There are probably people who don't mind their partners doing things like this, as long as it's not physical cheating, right? But not me. To me, this felt like a betrayal. Not in the traditional sense, but a betrayal all the same. The lies, the secrecy. The fact that she was selling herself online without ever bringing it up with me first. I wasn't just her husband anymore. I was the fool, left in the dark while she put herself on display for who knows how many men to gawk at. The detective leaned forward, snapping me out of my daze. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone not like he was apologizing for anything he'd done, but because he knew how hard this must be for me to hear. "I know this isn't easy." I nodded, still numb. "I should have seen it," I muttered almost to myself. All those photo shoots, all the nights she came home with new bags, new clothes, claiming it was part of the job. I never thought it was anything like this. We all miss things, the detective said, trying to offer some comfort. Sometimes people are good at hiding who they really are. But I couldn't shake it. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she come to me and at least explain what she was doing? Maybe she thought I'd flip out. Maybe she was scared of what I'd say. But still something. I kept thinking that if we had talked about it, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Maybe she wouldn't have felt the need to hide it. Or maybe we would have split up earlier, and I wouldn't be sitting in some office feeling like everything I thought I knew had crumbled. I thought back to all those times things started shifting. The more revealing photos, the frequent photo shoots, the new clothes. Every single one of those signs now made sense, knowing the truth behind them. Those weren't just innocent Instagram posts. They were for paying customers. I took the folder from the detective, barely able to look at the contents. It was all there, photos, records of transactions, messages between her and people I didn't know. Men paying for private content. Everything I needed to see, and I didn't know how to handle it. I left the office that day with more answers than I wanted. But at least I knew what I was dealing with now. What she'd been doing, who she had become, and I still had no idea what I was supposed to do next. After leaving the detective's office, that folder full of evidence in my hands, I felt like I was going to collapse. My head was spinning and my stomach churned. There was no way I could confront her right now, not with all this confusion and anger swirling around inside me. I needed to talk to someone who might understand, someone who wasn't tangled up in the lies. The only person I could think of was her sister. So, I drove to her place without calling first, just showing up at her door. I didn't know what I was going to say or how she'd react. But when she opened the door and saw me standing there, I think she could tell something was wrong. She looked at me with that concerned expression, like she was bracing herself for bad news. "Come in," she said softly. I stepped inside, feeling the weight of the folder in my hands, knowing what was coming. We sat down in her living room, just like we had the other night when I came to her for advice. But this time, I wasn't there for casual conversation. I was there to drop a bombshell. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I told her everything about the detective, the website, the photos, the money. At first, she just sat there, frozen, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Then her expression shifted. Disgust, maybe, or confusion. I pulled out the folder and showed her the evidence, the photos, the transactions, the schedule. She stared at it for what felt like forever before pushing it away. I had no idea," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't believe she's doing this." I muttered, feeling everything crashing down around me. I couldn't think clearly. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what my next move should be, but nothing made sense. I never saw any of this coming. She stood up and walked toward the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of wine from the counter. "Here," she said, pouring us both a glass. "You need this." I took the glass, grateful for anything that could dull the edge of everything swirling in my head. She sat back down, but I could tell she was trying to steer the conversation away from the mess her sister had caused. She asked about work, about anything but the truth that was tearing my life apart. Honestly, I was thankful for the distraction, even if just for a moment. It felt like a tiny breath of normalcy in a world that was anything but I knew it was just a temporary escape. No amount of small talk or wine could erase the reality of what was happening. Still, I appreciated her support. She didn't judge me, didn't make me feel stupid for not seeing the signs earlier. She was just there for me, and that meant more than I could express. When it was time to leave, I felt a strange calm wash over me, like maybe I wasn't so alone in this anymore. As I was about to say goodbye, I went in for a hug, something simple, something familiar. Just a gesture of thanks, of comfort. But when she hugged me back, it wasn't just friendly. She wrapped her arms around me tightly, like she didn't want to let go. And I'm not going to lie, there was something about it that made me feel warm, something that comforted me for the first time in days. It wasn't just the hug of a family member. It lingered longer than a normal hug would. Friendly hugs don't last that long, do they? At the time, I tried to convince myself it was just two people caught in a bad situation, offering each other a little support. But the way her body pressed against mine, the way her breath slowed against my shoulder, it felt different. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe I didn't want to. But one thing was clear. That hug was the start of something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. 2 days later, the dinner I had been dreading finally arrived. It had been planned for weeks, a family gathering at our place with her parents, her sister, and of course my wife. The last thing I wanted to do was sit at the table pretending everything was fine. But I decided I'd hold off on confronting her until then. If I was going to blow everything up, I figured I might as well do it with a bang. I still wasn't sure how I was going to approach it. Part of me wanted to pull her aside, confront her in private, and get it over with. But then I thought, why make it easy for her? She'd been hiding this from me for months, maybe longer. Her family, especially her conservative religious parents, deserved to know exactly who their daughter had become. The atmosphere at dinner was tense for me, at least. Everyone else was chatting, making small talk, but I could barely stay still. Her dad was making polite conversation about work. Her mom was asking about our life, acting like we were the perfect married couple. And my wife? She was playing the part, smiling, laughing, pretending like nothing was wrong. It was almost like our whole world wasn't falling apart. About halfway through dinner, after her sister had proudly mentioned how successful my wife's career was, I decided it was time. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual as I spoke. You know, I began, keeping my tone light. It's incredible how much she's accomplished lately. Really impressive. I glanced at my wife. Her smile faltered, just a bit, like she knew something was off. Her career's really taken quite an unexpected turn, I added. Her parents looked at me, curious but still clueless. Her sister, though, was giving me a cautious look, remembering our conversation from earlier. I let the words hang in the air, just long enough for everyone to start feeling uneasy. I continued, she's managed to balance her life as a social media influencer and, well, her other endeavors. I paused, letting that sink in. My wife's face started going pale. I could see her realizing what was happening. And since we're all here tonight, I said, I thought it might be a good time to show you exactly what she's been up to. I pulled out my phone, opened the browser, and navigated straight to her profile on that site. The one where she'd been posting those photos. The real source of her income. I turned the screen toward her parents. I didn't need to say anything else. The truth was right there in front of them. The silence that followed was deafening. Her mom's expression morphed from confusion to horror in seconds. Her dad's mouth opened, but no words came out. He just stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. And then all hell broke loose. Her mom started shouting, demanding to know how she could do this, what kind of life she had been living behind their backs. Her dad tried to stay calm at first, but his voice quickly escalated, a mix of disbelief and fury. My wife? She looked like she might pass out. She stammered out excuses, tried to defend herself, but nothing she said was landing. She was caught, and there was no way out of it. Her sister stayed silent, her eyes flicking between me and the chaos unfolding at the table. She didn't seem to know whose side to take, and the yelling only grew louder. I stood up, calmly took off my jacket. I didn't need to stick around to listen to the fallout. I had done what I came to do. They could fight it out without me. I'm going to head out, I said, my voice cutting through the shouting for just a brief moment. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed my keys and walked out. The cool night air hit me like a wave, and for the first time all evening, I felt a strange sense of relief, even as the echoes of their argument faded behind me. I wasn't angry anymore, just drained. I made my way to a nearby bar, the one I used to visit with friends before everything got so complicated. I found a seat, ordered a drink, and let the hum of the bar fill the silence that had settled over me. For the first time in days, I felt like I could finally breathe. About 20 minutes into my second drink, as the burn of alcohol started to dull the chaos I had just unleashed, she walked in. My wife's sister. I didn't expect her to be here. But as soon as she slid onto the stool next to me, it felt strangely natural. Like she belonged there, like this was where she was always meant to be. She didn't speak right away. She just sat down quietly, glanced at me for a second, then waved over the bartender. I'll have what he's having, she said, her voice soft but steady. I looked at her, our eyes meeting a moment longer than usual. There was something there, something unspoken. Neither of us acknowledged it, but we both knew what it was. The weight of everything that had happened. The mess we were both in, the fallout that was coming. We started with small talk, each of us pretending the elephant in the room wasn't there, like it would make things easier. She asked about work, about how I was handling everything. But there was an undertone in her voice, like she knew we were skirting around the inevitable. I answered her questions, but my mind wasn't really on the conversation. I kept glancing at her, noticing how different she was from her sister. Calm, composed, grounded. Everything my wife wasn't. As the hours passed and the drinks flowed, it became clear this wasn't just some casual conversation between in-laws. There was something more beneath the surface, something I hadn't expected but couldn't deny. I started to relax, feeling more at ease with her than I had with anyone in a long time. The tension I'd been carrying, the stress of my marriage, the lies, they seemed to slip away as we talked. And then, somewhere in the middle of the night, she reached over and took my hand. Her touch was kind, and there was a comforting familiarity in the way she reached out. "Do you want to go for a walk?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. I hesitated for a second, but deep down, I already knew the answer. "Yeah, let's go." We stepped out into the cool night air, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a sense of calm. The city around us was quieter than usual, and we walked side by side in silence, letting the peacefulness of the night sink in. After a while, we started talking. She told me how hard it had been for her to watch me and her sister fall apart, how she'd noticed the distance between us long before I did. She wasn't judgmental, just honest, and I appreciated that more than I could put into words. As we walked, I realized something. I didn't feel tense around her. I wasn't on edge. I wasn't waiting for the next fight or excuse. I felt lighter, alive, almost like I was younger, like the weight of everything I'd been carrying had been lifted. I hadn't felt that way in years. Not with my wife. Not with anyone. Before I knew it, we were at her place. The walk had flown by, and there we were, standing at her door. "You want to come inside?" she asked, her voice soft but inviting. I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to think about it. "Yeah," I said, stepping inside after her. The place was quiet, peaceful, the kind of peace I hadn't felt in my own home for what seemed like forever. She opened a bottle of wine, something she'd been saving for a special occasion, and we sat on her couch, talking about everything and nothing all at once. The tension between us was still there, palpable, but it was different now. It hummed in the air, just waiting. At some point, I lost track of the conversation entirely. We just looked at each other, and without saying anything, we shared a moment of understanding. It wasn't planned, but it felt like a natural step in our connection, offering a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. And in that moment, for just a brief instant, it felt like everything in the world was right. The night that followed was intense, but it wasn't just physical, it was something deeper. All the emotions I'd been bottling up, all the frustration and loneliness, finally had a chance to spill out. She made me feel things I hadn't felt in a long time, and I didn't want it to stop. I stayed at her place that night, and when I woke up the next morning, I didn't regret it, not for a second. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at my wife for what she'd done. It was about something new, something real. And in that moment, I realized I didn't owe my wife anything anymore. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. When I finally got home, my wife was waiting for me in the doorway, like she had been standing there for hours. The second I stepped inside, she slapped me hard across the face. The sting of it was sharp, but it didn't hurt nearly as much as everything that had led to this moment. "You're a fool," she spat at me, her eyes burning with fury. "You think I didn't know where you were? You think I care? I'm filing for divorce." I didn't react. In fact, I felt a strange sense of relief. She had saved me the trouble of bringing it up myself. "Good," I said, my voice calm. "That's probably the smartest thing you've said in a while." The divorce was surprisingly smooth. No long, dragged-out battles. No arguing over who would get what. We both knew it was over, and neither of us had the energy left to stretch it out. 2 months later, her sister and I sat down with her parents to tell them the truth. We were prepared for their anger, maybe their disgust. But instead, to our surprise, they were supportive. They were actually happy for us. Maybe they saw something in us that I hadn't been willing to acknowledge earlier, that this was the right thing for all of us. My ex-wife's parents, as traditional as they were, somehow managed to look beyond the mess and see that we were making something good out of the wreckage. As for my ex, she didn't waste any time. She threw herself even deeper into her social media world, embracing it with more enthusiasm than ever before. Without me around to criticize or question her choices, she was free to live however she wanted. And she thrived. Her followers shot up, her content started to get even more attention, and she seemed to be in her element. She was no longer burdened by the role of being a wife, especially mine. I didn't care. It wasn't my problem anymore. I had moved on to something real, something that made me feel alive again. And I never looked back. It's been about 2.5 years since everything fell apart, and I figured it was time to update everyone on where I'm at. A lot has changed, and honestly, life took a turn I couldn't have predicted when things were at their messiest. First of all, yes, I got married again. To my ex-wife's sister. That's still a strange thing to say out loud, but that's the truth. We tied the knot a little over a year ago. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small, intimate ceremony with close family and friends. And honestly, that was exactly what I wanted. After all the drama that came before, a quiet celebration felt like the right choice. And there's more. We're expecting. Yeah, we're having a baby. Sometimes it still doesn't feel real. Funny how life works out, huh? If you told me back when all that chaos started that I'd be starting a family with her, I would have thought you were insane. But here we are, preparing for the next big chapter of our lives. And I couldn't be happier about it. As for how things have been, well, they've been great. No, not just great, amazing. We've built a life together that's stable, peaceful, and completely drama-free. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. There are no secrets, no lies, just the two of us, tackling life's challenges side by side. And honestly, that's all I ever really wanted. As for my ex, I hear she's still thriving in her social media career. She's living her life, and by all accounts, she seems happy. We don't keep in touch, and frankly, I don't see a reason to. We've both moved on, and that's where it ends. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who's followed along with my story. It's been a roller coaster, but I'm grateful for where it's taken me. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that life has a way of working itself out, even when it seems completely broken. So, to anyone out there going through their own struggles, just keep moving forward. You never know where life will take you. Thanks again for all the support, and take care.